In a Saturday Review interview published on Christmas Day, 1971, Kubrick said, "I have always enjoyed dealing with a slightly surrealistic situation and presenting it in a realistic manner. I've always liked fairy tales and myths, magical stories, supernatural stories, ghost stories, surrealistic and allegorical stories. This interest of Kubrick's is evident in Eyes Wide Shut perhaps more than any of his other films, with its multitude of mythical allusions." Modern-day, Disney-like versions of fairy tales usually have happy endings, and they lived happily ever after. But many of these stories originate from macabre ancient tales. In context of Bill's psychosexual issues, the very phrase happy ending has certain connotations, a slang term for a prostitute bringing a male client to climax following a massage in a massage parlor. The end of the film evokes this, and Bill's sexual frustration, just as he goes through the story without ever actually having sex. Many thought the ending overly ambiguous and inconclusive. Some, like Martin Scorsese, saw it as an uplifting conclusion, a story about a husband and wife growing closer through emotional intimacy. And others thought it a cynical, even tragic tale of characters who begin with their eyes wide shut and end with their eyes still closed, having learned nothing. The final dialogue exchange between Bill and Alice.
And no dream is ever just a dream.
The important thing is we're awake now. And hopefully for a long time to come.
Forever.
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 Let's not use that word. You know, it frightens me.
This resonates as a sort of mockery of the "and they lived happily ever after" cliché. And then Eyes Wide Shut ends with one of the best last movie lines of all time.
And you know, there is something very important that we need to do as soon as possible.
What's that?
Fuck.
Kubrick's last word. Returning to the article introducing sociology, Tim Kreider describes the film as a savage critique of yuppie marriage, stating that Alice and Bill casually pimp their own little angel out to the world of commerce, with an ending intimating that the Harford's daughter is just as they've resigned themselves to being.
Fuck.
So, while fitting the prescription of a slipstream dreams story, the film might also appropriately be characterized as satire. A sardonic look at an upper-middle-class couple's misguided attempts to become members of the freakish ruling class. However, years after his initial review, Kreider added an afterword describing the film as espousing a more positive perspective of humanity than he first thought. A film about intimate, domestic life, about a blindly complacent but basically happy marriage, testing its fault lines of temptation, jealousy, and resentment, and leaving it stronger and more truthful. One particular detail in the ending has emerged as the focus of extensive debate. Two men at Ziegler's party, sitting at a table below a Cupid and Psyche statue, by the staircase that Bill ascends with Ziegler's butler, are seen again in the toy shop. We never see them very clearly or for very long in either scene, but it appears to be the same guys. They wear black suits, one wears glasses, both are bald with grey hair. Rich old white men. They're inconspicuously browsing behind where Bill and Alice are talking when Helena seemingly follows them behind a rack. It happens very quickly amidst the hustle-bustle of the store, but it looks like the same two men from Ziegler's are leading Helena away. Helena disappears right after Bill and Alice pat her on the back, as if encouraging her to follow the men. She looks up at her father, and he and Alice both nonchalantly rub her back in mid-conversation and look down at her. Then she walks towards the two men. Bill looks back at Alice, and Alice turns her head towards Helena as if for one last look at her. Helena looks questioningly back at Alice, then follows the men. It's as if Helena is checking in with her parents, asking them, "Are you sure I should go this way?" And Bill and Alice say, "Yes, honey, go with those capitalist men." Capitalism is the best way. And they watch her go, but it cuts back to face close-ups of Bill and Alice before we see if Helena actually follows the men all the way around the corner, leaving her fate ambiguous. At this moment, a shelf full of stuffed tiger dolls lines the right side of the screen behind Alice, the same tiger stuff he's seen earlier on Domino's bed. The tiger or leopard print pattern has remained popular in female fashion for decades, sexualizing women as exotic wild creatures. Are Bill and Alice so blind to the horrific sex abuse powers of the rich that they don't notice their daughter's abduction? Or they willingly sell her to the cult, linking to the Rosemary's Baby theme of sacrificing one's child to secure entry? They seem oblivious or surrendered or even supportive of Helena going with the men. The same to seen at Ziegler's. Henchmen of the ultra-wealthy. What are the implications of this in relation to systemic pedophilia in the Catholic Church? Conspiracy theories of wealthy elites running child trafficking sex rings, satanic ritual sacrifice, etc. That is to say, a very dark and unsettling ending. After all they've just experienced, Bill and Alice give up their child to the upper echelon sex cult to buy their way in and just want to fuck. Is this a horror story, a brazen condemnation of capitalism, a scathing satire of the immorality of the ultra-rich? I'm struggling with this idea, but it does apply to what was happening with Kubrick and his daughter Vivian at the time the film was going into production. She'd become estranged from the family, seduced by Scientology. Perhaps Kubrick is saying that he and his wife, like Bill and Alice, were so preoccupied with their own lives that they barely noticed their daughter being led dangerously astray, or surrendered to their own powerlessness in preventing it. If the names Helena, Sabrina, and Carlotta are intentional references, what does it mean? If Helena's comment, "I can put Sabrina in here," refers to putting Come with Sabrina into the Rosemary's Baby buggy, is Helena recognizing herself and her parents as inevitable victims of rich, powerful men? In effect saying, "I can sacrifice the female spirit who protects feminine virtue from abuse by predatory men by putting her into this demon carriage, and by doing so I will gain access to, buy myself into, an elite status." And she does it unconsciously, repeating the patterns of cultural energy that swirl around her, the demons that infect her, the Barbie dolls, the tiger stuffies, the Disney fairy tales, the savior prince. Bill and Alice teach her these things because it's what they were taught. Alice, the beautiful bored housewife with the rich doctor husband, who flirts with creepy older men at lavish parties. Bill with his old boys' club desires, the scotch, the hookers, his old college buddy. They're all trying to live out some version of themselves that advertisers made up to sell stuff. They themselves are the toys in the toy shop. It's a dark examination of the worst side of human nature and the capitalist manifesto. But on the other hand, little to nothing we see happen in this movie is real. With this in mind, I tend toward the interpretation that it's a genuine happy ending to an alternately ironic and satirical, sincere and dramatic adult Christmas movie, an unlikely fairy tale. Bill and Alice pat Helena on the back as if to tell her that everything's okay, that those two men don't really exist except in their own minds. that Helena is safe, because they now know evil is an illusion that only exists within themselves, which they are now facing up to, and so it no longer holds power over them. There's no film credit for the actors who play the two mysterious men, no evidence, not a trace they ever existed. They sat by a winged statue, and Helena wore fairy wings. Are they all spirits? What if the two men aren't sinister agents at all, but rather kindly guardian angels in the vein of It's a Wonderful Life? The story of an angel, at Christmas time, helping a man appreciate his life by showing him a dark alternate reality. Maybe the doubled old guys are like Clarence the angel from It's a Wonderful Life, or the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future from A Christmas Carol. And it's Helena's turn to be shown the mirror realities, the possible alternate timeline versions of herself as Ilona, Domino, or Milik's daughter, to forewarn her so that she might avoid the fate of succumbing to misogyny and wake up as her parents finally have. Maybe the twin old guys are there to watch over Helena at the end, as they were there to watch over Bill and Alice at Ziegler's party to make sure neither of them actually cheated, and Bill and Alice now realize the secret society isn't real, so is no longer a danger to them. And there's Alice's dream, a dream within a dream, and through the looking glass, and the Wizard of Oz. The dreams that you dare to dream really do come true. There's a lot that implies narrative events are not actually happening as we are shown, but are largely figments of Bill's imagination, projections from the unconscious, the Freudianid, the Jungian shadow. But when do the dream segments start and end? There is no clear delineation between fantasy and reality in the film, which is partly why it's so puzzling. As far as we know, the Halfords are all okay in the end. No, better off than when they started. It's just a toy baby buggy. It's just a doll, a dream. Bill and Alice share a kind of intimacy that they haven't in years, if ever. They tell the truth to each other. Neither of them actually cheated. They're still alive and rich. The threat is over, if even there ever really was one. Maybe the twin old men represent both good and bad qualities of patriarchy. How men can concurrently care for and oppress women, embodying the worst evil of corruption and abuse and the protective, comforting strength of fatherly or husbandly guidance. How can we be sure about the ending, and what is real or not? We can't be sure, and this is why Kubrick films are both exasperating and enlightening, but ultimately transformative. He made works of art that challenge us to penetrate the deepest recesses of our own hearts and minds to draw out meaningful reflections about life. Some Kubrick scholars assert that the recurrence of the two men is simply an instance of reusing crowd extras to reduce production costs, and their double appearance has no narrative importance. But these same scholars also emphasize Kubrick's painstaking attention to detail, stating that nothing in a Kubrick film is there by chance, the composition of every frame filled with meaning. So how do we reconcile this? After all, there's the Cupid greeting card and the Eros sign. The two men sit near a winged Cupid statue. Helena wears fairy wings, and the three of them appear together at the end. If we accept all this as mere oversight on Kubrick's part, then what other symbolic, metaphorical elements should we regard as being in the film for purely economical reasons? And then Kubrick was not the thorough, calculating filmmaker that everyone says, or he used to be. But by the film was released he was old, tired, and sloppy. But no one wants to admit this and would rather uphold the idea of individuals throughout history as geniuses, as if such people reflect the greatest potential of humankind and somehow give us hope in a dark world. So we look for meaning. The movie begins and ends with Alice. Although Bill is the protagonist, Alice is the catalyst for his voyage of self-discovery and awareness. signaling an unstable masculinity and a scent of femininity within a male-dominated society. The film's opening shot is Alice naked, undressing, with her back to the camera in a medium shot. And the closing shot is a close-up of her face, teary eyes, with a blank expression, no makeup, and wearing glasses, humanized. This epitomizes Bill's journey, and ours as the audience, moving from viewing woman as an object to viewing her as a person, its progress. Bill starts out in denial, naive about his wife's sexual desires and his own, but as Alice says, now that they're awake they can finally, in a more intimate way than ever before, fuck. That is, acknowledging fantasies can allow for more meaningful connection with sexual partners in reality, rather than remaining fantasy which only briefly, superficially fulfills, if at all, or can be dangerous and destructive if pursued blindly. The quest for wealth is a terrible lie manifested from our own unacknowledged insecurities, but to explore one's dark side, the shadow, through the mirror of a spouse, and as such face oneself, can result in overcoming fear and temptation to live more honestly and fully. So, maybe it is a hopeful ending, saying that evil is an illusion, that seeking material wealth and power over others is what is evil, and recognizing this frees us from the demon spirit forces dancing around, inside and outside of us. Russian filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky's science fiction epic Solaris from 1972, adapted from Stanislaw Lem's 1961 novel, has often been compared to Kubrick's 2001, but it also draws connections to Eyes Wide Shut. The story involves a space station orbiting Solaris, a planet covered entirely by ocean, which scientists believe is an intelligent, sentient being. One day, the cosmonaut protagonist finds his wife, who has been dead for 10 years, alive in his quarters. She is not a hallucination, but rather an embodiment of his memory of her, as if Solaris has probed his consciousness and confronted him with a physical replica of his most deeply embedded psychic imprint, in an attempt at communication, just as Eyes Wide Shut shows Bill facing characters from his dream consciousness. Solaris explores the idea that everyone a person encounters is a reflection of their self. An art model I know claims each painting she models for looks like an amalgamation of her and the artist themselves. Eyes Wide Shut is really all about perception. Kubrick is talking about conquering the biggest weapon wielded by the ruling class, fear. The things you fear most don't actually exist unless you fear them. This is the paradox in the title, describing the movie's thesis. It can't be explained in words. As we know, Kubrick understood a movie as an experience that directly penetrates the subconscious with an emotional and philosophic content. The film is a dream movie, an old-fashioned fairy tale, an alternative Christmas movie, a satirical love story, and with its displays of sexual abuses of power and capitalist decadence. It's simultaneously a kind of horror and anti-horror film, in the sense that there actually is a lot to fear, but only if you fear it, only if you seek it, that is, only if you enter the darkness unknowingly, in denial, blind. There's nothing to be scared of, except yourself. This is both comforting and frightening, like that saying, we don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. Or that other one, we see what we want to see. Eyes Wide Shut is a film of vast scope and depth, unrelenting in its exploration of the effects that human evolution, history, politics, an art of on dreams, perception, sex, and relationships. Kubrick presents us with the theatre of the mythic, where fabulous inventions reflect our darkest potential, penetrating our psyches through the art of illusion. Ancient artifacts are brought to light in the mundanity of the present. Kubrick made works of art to be dissected and discussed, not mere crowd-pleasing entertainment to be simply consumed and agreed upon. As such, Eyes Wide Shut endures, as Stanley Kubrick himself proclaimed before his death upon completion of the film, as his greatest work.